I'm just gonna say a lot of this is true, but I definitely work way more. Hello everyone, it's me Bryson P. What is a typical work schedule for you? Because all across the world there's many different schedules, and we've got people that work from sun up to sundown, people that work from sundown to sun up, people that work in the middle of the day, in the middle of the night, all kinds of different schedules. The 4-hour work week, is that the best one? I don't know. But Second Thought has a video about it, and they are one of my favorite channels to react to just because of the polar opposites that we are in our thought process. So this is kind of like giving me a second thought as well. I actually used to work a 4-day work week whenever I was fresh out of high school. I worked for a military contract, and we got to work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, 10-hour shifts, and then be off, of course, every single Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I loved it. Coincidentally, the same day that I'm making this, I was talking with one of my customers at work who is a union worker for an electrical contractor, and they were discussing how nice it would be to have a 4-day work week, and that their boss and the owner of the company would absolutely not allow that because working around other unions that are in the factories here, it's too complicated to try and work together and commingle for things to get done. I'm sure that probably happens where you live, but also at the same time you all are more union friendly, so I'm sure that you all are a lot more capable of getting stuff done. So, second thought, let's get into this and see what you think about the 4-day work week. Here we go.
In the immortal words of philosopher Tom DeLonge, work sucks, I know. So what if we worked less? You know that feeling when you get to work on Wednesday morning and you're like, man, I've still got half a week to go. It's awful, and people have been experiencing that same feeling for like 100 years now. Though admittedly, back then, most workers were just glad they weren't working 100-hour weeks like their parents had. All the way back in 1926, the Ford Motor Company decided to implement a 5-day, 40-hour work week. This was due to a number of factors, primarily pressure from militant labor, but also the fact that Henry Ford thought that by offering pretty solid employment perks for the time, comparatively good work-life balance, and a wage well above the average, he could grow his customer base, which would increase brand recognition and drive further sales. A little over a decade later, the Fair Labor Standards Act codified a 44-hour workweek in federal law, and that was adjusted to 40 hours per week 2 years later.
Can you imagine what it was like to work during like the Industrial Revolution or in the Roaring 20s, or during those times where not only did you have very few labor laws, but you also had to work extremely hard for extremely little amount of compensation. You know, it was tough, very tough back then. And we think that we have it bad now, but yet we have so much advancements in technology and so much advancements in everything. So a lot of times you don't think about just how hard it was and the amount of risk and danger it also was working in factories or in these types of environments as well.
This meant that if bosses wanted their employees to work longer hours, they'd have to pay overtime. There were, and still are, plenty of exceptions to this rule, but that's a topic for another video. The point is, there haven't been any meaningful changes to the federally recognized workweek since the World War II era. Why is that? Let's look at some historical context. The period leading up to the recognition of the 5-day, 40-hour workweek was incredibly tumultuous. You had the First World War, intense labor and union activity pushing for better conditions, the Great Depression, and then the Second World War. Americans were fed up with being treated like dirt and used as cannon fodder.
So while we're talking about right now coming into the 40-hour work week, my question to you is going to be how many hours per week do you typically work? Because right now, for the last 2 years, I've been averaging, I average around 50, about 50 hours per week, give or take. Sometimes a little bit less, but on average, I can do about 50 hours per week is what I've been doing.
Fodder for the benefit of society's upper crust. In addition to these factors, the Industrial Revolution shifted the way we look at work. It drew hundreds of thousands of people into new, developing cities to work in factories, and productivity went through the roof with the implementation of new machinery. The combination of these technological, economic, and social factors made it possible for workers to secure some important victories for labor, including the modern workweek as we know it. If you'd like to learn a bit more about the importance and power of militant labor, check out the recent episode we did on unions. Now, if productivity gains were a major factor in winning the 5-day workweek, why haven't we seen something similar in more recent years? Since 1979, breakthroughs in computing and other modern technologies have allowed a sort of second industrial revolution. Productivity has once again swiftly increased, and has vastly outpaced worker compensation. We're getting more done today in a single afternoon than our grandparents could have done in a week, and
Absolutely.
we're getting paid less for it when adjusted for inflation and cost of living.
Okay, so taking out that last part about the pay, but being able to do tasks so much quicker than our grandparents, or even so much quicker than our parents. Yesterday, for example, I had to make a bunch of inventory adjustments in our warehouse and what we have and don't have, and getting rid of some stuff that was from years ago. And the owner of the company had me do it while he kind of sat there and took some calls and more or less played on his phone and just hung out with me. But he was sitting there and could see how fast I was putting it into the system and getting it out of the system and getting those, stacks of papers done. And one of the comments he made, of course, is, geez, you young guys are able to do it so much quicker, and you all are so fast at these computers, because that would have took me an hour to do and it took you less than 10 minutes. So that's kind of in the same realm as to what we're talking about here.
We don't need to work as many hours as we do to accomplish our tasks, so why haven't we shortened the workweek accordingly? Well, as with most things starting around the 70s and 80s, we can thank everyone's favorite president, Ronald Reagan. It shouldn't surprise anyone that delinking productivity gains from worker compensation was intentional. Policymakers in the Reagan era, and in the extended Reagan universe since then, have tried their best to decouple economic growth from employee compensation, meaning that as companies reap larger profits, they don't also have to raise employee pay, which in turn means more of that money goes into the pockets of executives and shareholders. This more conservative economic worldview.
For that example, I'd like to just point out, I've been at my company for 3 years in November, and I've had a 50-cent raise. And you can imagine, of course, inflation and everything else that has gone up, and cost of living and everything else that has gone up in the past almost 3 years. 50 cents, or about $20 per week extra, it's not worth much whenever everything is double, sometimes triple what it was.
Part of Reagan's famous trickle-down economics, which, mind you, has been thoroughly debunked in recent years, also explains the reason we haven't heard much talk of shortening the workweek. Why give workers more time off when you can just keep squeezing more value out of them? But here's the thing. We have the data to show that a shorter workweek not only improves workers' lives, but positively impacts the company they work for too. Let me explain. It's no secret that humans aren't productive the entire 8 or so hours they're at work. There's just not enough to keep us busy for that long. The exact figures vary by industry, but on average, workers are only engaged in productive, business-related activities for less than 60% of the day. The stats for office workers are particularly striking. Assuming an 8-hour day, the average office worker is only productive for 2 hours and 23 minutes. That's a huge amount of time where there's just nothing to do. There are only so many emails you can respond to after all. Now, we've got a couple options here. The first is for the boss to find a way to force workers to be productive for the entire 8 hours, or
I'm just gonna say, a lot of this is true, but I definitely work way more. There's times we have a lot of downtime, and yes, there is a lot of time where I piddle around. That's one of our southern words from prior video. There's a lot of times where I just piddle around because I'm also waiting on another customer to come in or for a phone to ring. Sometimes you also can't just leave your area and go do all these other things that need to be done, because at the same time you're shorthanded or you're understaffed or you've got people on vacation or any other reason why, maybe we all have our own workloads, and so each person trying to do their own workload, we can't all manage everything and run everything unless we kind of homogeneously work together. And that's a good thing about a homogeneous society like you all have. We work together and it makes it efficient. Now, I work a lot more hours than most of the people there. There's only a handful of people that work the amount of hours that I do or more. But for the vast majority, everybody works 40 hours, maybe 42 hours, and that's it. So I kind of have a whole different standing agreement with the owners of the company because I also do a lot more than most of the other people that I work directly with.
Or at least closer to it. Usually this takes the form of enforcing busy work. For me, when I worked at Best Buy selling cameras, that meant polishing the lens cases anytime I wasn't actively talking to a customer. And let me tell you, those were the cleanest panes of glass in all of Texas. After a certain point, it's just ridiculous to try to keep workers working for the sake of not being unproductive. Obviously, this practice has overwhelmingly negative effects. It's mind-numbing, pointless, and makes you hate your job and your boss just a little bit more. Even from a capitalist perspective, it's pretty clear that enforcing...
So, for an example, I'm on my phone out of the 9-10 hours per day that I'm at my work. This baby is in my hand probably half that. Again, where I work and what I do, I'm allowed to pretty much be on my phone as much as I need to be. There are times where obviously I have to put it away because I need to get other things done, but I can practically walk around on Facebook or on Instagram or on YouTube or whatever while I'm doing my job. It's crazy, and a lot of times also that's why I talk about my pay may not be the best, but there's a lot of benefits that I have and things that I can get away with and do that I just couldn't do at any other company that I've ever been at, and it would be hard to replace that.
Maximum productivity is a net negative. That's where shortening the work week comes in. There have been a number of 4-day workweek trials in different countries over the last few years. Let's take a look at some of the conclusions from the most recent experiments, which were conducted in the US and Ireland in 2022. The two trials, which began in February and March, consisted of 33 companies and over 900 employees. The premise was simple. Companies that were interested in trying out a reduced workweek received training, tools, and prep to make sure the transition from 5 days to 4 went smoothly. The goals were to maintain productivity and revenue while increasing employee morale and improving work-life balance. But the actual results blew those goals out of the water. Not only did revenue not decrease, it actually rose by 8%. Employee retention rose, absenteeism dropped. 2/3 of workers reported lower levels of burnout. Ratings for mental and physical health improved as workers could get more sleep and had more time to exercise. And they were less bored at work since there was less pointless downtime and busy work.
I will absolutely agree with that and say that there are absolute benefits to a 4-day work week. When I used to work in the hospitals, I always worked 12-hour shifts. And so I would work 3 days one week, and then I would work 4 days the next week, 3 days the next week, 4 days the next week.
Across the board, in every aspect of work, ratings improved for both the employees and the companies. These pilot programs were so successful that 97% of involved workers responded in favor of continuing the 4-day workweek. Presumably, those last 3% just really like water cooler small talk about the weather or something. Very few things in life return results as clearly positive as these 4-day workweek trials. This is clearly the way forward, and it's essentially unanimous among workers, with some of them even reporting that no amount of money could convince them to return to a 5-day workweek. And all this is just considering the immediate effects on companies and their workers. The subsequent social and environmental effects would also be significant. Take commuting, for example. If a 4-day workweek were implemented at the federal level, that's a 20% reduction in commuting overnight. Roughly 130 million Americans drive to work every day. Think of the reduction in emissions from car exhaust from this one change alone. That is a staggering improvement, and one with essentially zero drawbacks, except presumably more intense propaganda from the fossil fuel industry as their profits shrink. Then as far as societal changes go, just think about what you would do with an extra weekend day every week. Think how many more meaningful things we could do with family and friends, or heck, just by ourselves. Simply getting to decompress and take an extra day for ourselves would dramatically improve the mental health of the entire workforce. You'd end up with a country of happier, healthier, less stressed, more rested workers. This, by every possible measure, is a no-brainer.
Yeah.
So, what's the catch? This sounds a little too...
Isn't that ultimately what I would like for us to be one day? A more homogenous country like the Scandinavian or the Nordic countries? Because you guys are consistently ranking among the top of the happy index scale. That'd be nice.
Good to be true. Well, for one thing, we have to consider where exactly this push is coming from. This guy, Andrew Barnes, is the one more or less responsible for popularizing the notion of the 4-day workweek. He's a CEO himself, a position antagonistic to labor. Even if he has the best of intentions, the inherent contradictions between capital and labor makes his advocacy for a 4-day workweek tenuous at best. Regardless of how nice a guy he seems, look at how he talks about the initiative.
Now, people were changing their behaviors. They were recognizing that the day off was a gift, and it had to be earned. It wasn't something that you could just take for granted.
Barnes sees the 4-day week as a gift to his workers, not as a right based simply on the fact that productivity has increased so dramatically in the last 100 years. That perspective is obviously flawed, and should serve as a useful reminder and a warning that the capitalist class is always willing to rescind these privileges in order to increase their profits. They weren't working in 26.
Oh no, we just lost where we were.
That perspective is obviously flawed, and should serve as a useful reminder and a warning that the capitalist class is always willing to rescind these privileges in order to increase their profits.
Yeah. Before I screwed that up was that type of idea, that type of mindset of, well, you're gonna get we'll switch to a 4-day work week and we'll try that out on a trial run basis, and we're gonna do that, and it's a gift to you that you get that extra day off each week. That's the type of boss that I don't want to work for, and that's the type of employer that I wouldn't want to work for. That's the type of employer, exactly as he's saying, that will take that privilege away whenever it comes time to maximize profits, or whenever those pockets that he has are becoming less lined than they already are. That's my thought too. I agree with that 100%.
Indeed, if you listen to most of the executives who praise the initiative, it's less about the fact that a 4-day workweek is just common sense and more humane, and more about the fact that it yields more efficient and compliant cogs in their machine. This is not to say that these executives are necessarily bad people, just that the goals of capital and labor are in direct conflict. The goal of capital is to increase profits and decrease costs, and the goal of labor is to get as much money as possible for their time and labor power. These two things will never be in alignment. But in the case of the 4-day workweek, it's about as close as it gets. The trials we've seen so far have followed the 100-80-100 model, a proposition that guarantees 100% of the worker's normal pay in 80% of the time, with a commitment to deliver 100% of their work in that time. Workers get time off and keep their pay. Businesses reduce costs in the form of electricity, turnover, and inefficiency. There are benefits to both parties, and that is the only reason we might see this actually come to pass. But here's the thing. While we absolutely should push for the federal implementation of a 4-day workweek, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that until that time, this initiative is entirely dependent on the willingness of the capitalist class. We only won the 5-day workweek thanks to a tremendously powerful militant labor movement. Same with all the other things we take for granted today. Child labor laws, workplace safety laws, social security, vacation time, and so much more. As we've explored in past videos, we are at the beginning of a new labor movement, but it's nowhere near as strong as it was 100 years ago. I'm not saying that to discourage anyone, but rather to remind you that
we're definitely at the forefront of a labor movement, because we have a lot of people that are working remotely than ever before. We have a lot of people that are not working at all than ever before. We have a lot of people that are working a job as a internet host on YouTube and on podcasts and doing what I'm doing, but on a much, much bigger and better popular scale. They're doing that as their job. These things did not exist 50 years ago, let alone 100 years ago. So we are definitely at the beginning of a complete, revamp, I would say, of our labor throughout not only the United States, but possibly around the world, because we're going to have people, our minimum wage has to go up at some point. I think it's ridiculous that even with everything going on and in the economic climate that we have right now, but yet we've still not even began to attempt to raise the minimum wage yet. Minimum wage here is still $7.25 an hour. You tell me how anybody could afford to even think about living off of that. So we're definitely at some part of an economic and labor shift and everything else that is not anything that we really know, because another 15, 20 years from now, we don't know how much more internet it will be compared to what it is now.
The capitalist class will not feel any pressure to actually go through with it, especially in industries where reducing working hours would cut into profits. So yes, while it is obvious that it's high time to bring our conception of work into the 21st century, we also need to continue building the labor movement so that we can demand these changes, not depend on the unreliable and self-serving generosity of the capitalist class. There was a time when workers had real say in their working conditions, and we can have that again. If you'd like to be a part of that, look into unionizing your workplace or joining a socialist organization. I've left links to the IWW and some of the bigger orgs in the description. Every one of us has a role to play. It's only together that we can force the change we want to see. Why not start with a 4-day work week?
So the 4-day per week work week, is that something that you think that we'll be able to implement and be able to get more and more businesses on board with as we progress in the future? I think that we will see more of it, but at the same time, I also see that we're going to have more and more shift again towards being able to work remotely, being able to work, on the internet and do different things. And you're still going to have your shifts that are going to be 12 hours that are 7 days a week. You're still going to have your shifts that are, Monday through Friday. There's just, I think, going to be industries and certain businesses and services that are going to need to have people pretty much at all times or throughout certain days, certain times of the week, where you're going to be able to implement, more 4-day work weeks and more flexible schedules. Again, you're still going to have probably a mixture of it all, ultimately in the end. So that's all I have for today. Thank you for watching. Have a great day, great night, whatever time it is. It's me, Bryson P. Goodbye.